Hey, all American Chapel Navs and alumni have been here before. Tonight we're going to talk about probably the easiest tool you have in your kit bag to share the most powerful story ever told, the gospel itself. In 2 Peter, Peter says this. He says, "For we do not follow cleverly devised tales when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but we are eyewitnesses of his majesty." He's talking about his testimony. So I invite you to join us tonight as Seth Brown shares his testimony about how the Lord has been at work in his life.
Good evening, everyone. Just to reiterate, my name is Seth Brown, and I just want to say thank y'all for having me up here to be able to share my testimony with you tonight and just share the story of how Jesus became the Lord of my life. So I grew up on a tobacco farm about 2 hours northwest of here in a town called King, North Carolina. And in that town, I grew up in the heart of the Bible Belt. If you hadn't felt it yet here in Fayetteville, I don't know how long you've been here, but we're right in the thick of it. And that was the same as the town that I grew up in. Mostly everybody went to church, so it wasn't if you went to church, it's which church did you go to. And in that community, in that culture that I grew up in, I grew up with a lot of good knowledge. Grew up with a lot of good values. And I knew a lot about Jesus, but I didn't know Jesus. I grew up knowing a lot about the right things to say when people ask you questions, the right words to use whenever you're in front of Christians or your Christian friends, but those were really just tailored to whatever situation that I was in. It was not the encompassment of my life. I don't know if that's a word, but I just used it in a sentence. So, and just to give you some examples of that, while growing up and going to church on Sundays, going to church on Sunday nights, going to church on Wednesday nights, and even being the president of like the Fellowship of Christian Students at school. Those were the things that I showed people on the outside. Those are the things that I really wanted people to see, especially like all my parents, friends, my parents, family, people like that. But what they didn't see, what I hid from them, was I had, for 3 or 4 years, I had a pretty rough gambling problem. I would not leave the house with less than $100 cash so I could play cards at school or with someone flipping quarters, anything. Dave's laughing because we've talked about this story. I knew someone who made moonshine, and I would buy moonshine from them and also buy cigarettes by the carton and sell them out of my truck at high school football games. If there was a party within 10 or 20 miles, I was there on Friday and Saturday nights. While all the time being there at church on Sunday mornings, even leading a little small group in our Sunday school classes, leading a study at school. And so finally a friend called me out on it at one point, the facilitator or the teacher at school that was the school sponsor for Fellowship of Christian Students. He was like, "Man, you are not the same person here or on Sunday mornings that I see at church as you are Friday and Saturday nights and the pictures that I see you tagged in or the stories that I hear about what you've been doing." And at the time, I just sort of brushed it off. You know, I'm 17 years old and think that I know everything about life, and I know everything about the relationship that Jesus and I have worked out. I get to do whatever I want, and then he's going to forgive me. And anyway, it's high school, and you're young. Like, you're supposed to sow your wild oats, right? You're supposed to get it all out of your system. And I think the reason that I had that mindset is not because it wasn't around, but I wasn't looking for people that were my age or a few years older than me that were actively pursuing a relationship with Jesus. And it just wasn't at the top of my priority. So I had my mindset of what a follower of Jesus was somebody at least 40 years or older. And that's when you became serious about following Jesus. So I graduated high school, enlisted as a medic in the Army, and went through basic training in AIT, and I was removed from that culture, from that community that I grew up in, of where everybody went to church. I wouldn't say that I was sheltered in a sense, but I was sheltered to a sense that not everyone around the country goes to church every Sunday. And so that was sort of eye-opening to me, getting out of that Bible Belt. And I I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew that there was something more that I was missing. And being the good Christian like I thought I was, I brought my Bible to all those schools and just started reading a little bit here and there, looking for answers. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew that I had questions. Didn't really know what questions I had, just knew that I needed answers to anything. And so I started doing that, but I still wasn't taking it very seriously. I was probably just doing it so the guys next to me would see that I was reading my Bible and think, oh, he's better than I am. In all honesty, if I'm being honest. And so I did all that, got to my first duty station, and I was at JBLM at Fort Lewis in Washington, and went to chapel the first Sunday or two that I was there, and two guys, they came up and introduced themselves to me after the service, Zach Abrams and Hayden Meredith, and they invited me out to a Bible study, a Navigator's Bible study there. This was the March of 2014. And so I started going. And it was at that point I realized sort of what they were, it sort of started to hit home. I think it was somebody's memory verse within the first couple of weeks that I was there, Revelations 3:16, where Jesus is speaking to the church of Laodicea. I may have said it wrong. And he says, since you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. And that was exactly the life that I had been living up to that point. I was neither all in it for the kingdom, nor was I all in it for the world. I was sort of teetering on both ends and just sort of going wherever it was comfortable for me at the time and the people that I was around. But once somebody quoted that as a memory verse for them, it really just sort of sank in and started hitting home. And in that Bible study, in that community that I was invited into, I started seeing guys that were my age or a few years older than me being serious about their relationship with Jesus. It wasn't just a bunch of older men sitting around drinking coffee. And so that was really encouraging to me. During that initial first couple weeks, Hayden was the guy who first initially discipled me. And he saw a need for the Word in my life. And that was the biggest thing that I needed at the time, was just to get in the Word daily, to have a relationship with Jesus. And so Hayden saw that, and he invited me to join him at 5 a.m. every morning before work to start getting in the Word together. And so that's what we did. And during that time, I also moved into a bachelor pad with some other guys from the ministry. And that was the first time that I had ever lived in a house with men who were living there for a purpose. They weren't living there just for cheap rent. They weren't just living there because they liked the guys that they were sharing a house with, which those were true things. They were living there for a purpose, to use the house for ministry, for themselves to be able to know Christ and to make Him known to others, and just growing through that process of learning their own relationship and growing in their own relationship with Jesus, and then helping other young men do that. So that was the first time I had ever been in such an intentionally minded community and in a house to be able to share that. So I'm forever grateful for sharing that experience with those guys. So along that process of me gleaning what they were teaching and just sharing life in that community, God provided a man that I'd been praying for, just praying for God to bring me somebody for me to be able to share these things that other people had been sharing me, because I had been shown that model. You know, the 2 Timothy 2:2. Find a man, or have a man pour into you, and then you pour into another guy, and then he's able to pour into another guy. So I was looking for my man. I was looking for my Timothy or my others. And so God provided a man like that, Caleb Fassler. And I didn't really know much yet. I just knew that getting in the Word was a good thing to do. And I knew the model that had been set for me at 5 a.m. Most guys aren't doing things but sleeping. So asking him, hey, do you want to get together at 5 and start reading the Bible? And so that's what we did. We would sit in the company parking lot before he did PT. And then the clinic that I was working at was just right down the street. And so we started doing quiet times together. And God just really worked in Caleb and I's time reading the Bible together and sharing those experiences with one another. And it was during that time that God gave a fire in my heart for helping other men grow closer with Christ. Some of you may have experienced it, and if you hadn't, I pray that you do. But you can tell it whenever you're with a guy and he's reading or sharing what he just read, and you just see the spark in his eye that was not there before whenever y'all had talked about it. And so he really found out, I guess, is lack of a better term, really finding out who Jesus was as a person, as a personal relationship, instead of a guy in a book written thousands of years ago. So that was time with Caleb. And then through that process, after Hayden had left, Mike Chong started discipling me. And then after living in the pad for a year, Mike and Liz invited me to move into their house. And I'm going to explain what they did, but just to give you an idea, they modeled 1 Thessalonians 2:8 to a T to me in my life at the time that I was in. 1 Thess 2:8 says, "We loved you so much that we delighted not only in sharing the gospel of God with you, but our lives as well, because you had become so dear to us." And I don't know why they thought of me that way, but I was so thankful that they did, because Mike and Liz had 3 kids at the time. Liz was super pregnant with her 4th child. I'm sorry, Liz, if you watch this, you weren't super pregnant. And so just them inviting 2 guys, 2 20-something-year-olds into their home during that crazy season of life really opened my eyes to what these people were about and how serious they were about helping other people following Jesus. And the reason that they moved me in is probably one of the biggest reasons was the proximity, the relationships, the conversations that you have with people when you're living that closely together is just different than an interaction that we would get from something like this if we just see each other once a week or maybe a couple times a week. So sharing life with them really changed my life, and seeing how Mike responded as a father, how Mike responded to Christ as a husband, how he responded to Christ as a soldier, as a man, as a navigator rep, whatever title you want to put. He had a kingdom focus on every aspect of his life, and he was able to share that with me through his life. So I'm grateful for him, grateful of Christ working in him through that in my life. While I was living with the Chongs, God started teaching me 4 pretty key things about the Word. The first being the Word being our spiritual food. So in Matthew 4:4, when Jesus is getting tempted by the devil in the desert, and Satan tells him to turn these rocks into stones, or turn these stones into bread, Jesus responds with, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of my Father." And so spiritual food is just as important, if not more important, than physical food. That was one of the principles that I was starting to learn. Another principle that I started to learn was the Word is eternal. In Mark 13:31, Jesus says, "Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away." And so that got me really thinking from a practical standpoint about what things are eternal. And what am I investing in? Am I investing in things that are going to last for eternity, like the Word and men's souls? Or am I investing in things that are going to just perish here on earth, like what vehicle I drive or what my career is? The third thing that I learned through John 17, which if you haven't read or reread or read multiple times that passage, I highly encourage you to. John 17:17, about the Word being truth. Jesus is talking praying to God, and he's talking about his apostles, talking about the men that he had been with. And he says, "Sanctify them by the truth. Your word is truth." And so really being set apart by the truth and really knowing the truth. Am I investing my life into truth, or am I investing my life into lies that the world or the culture that I'm in tells me, or that I deceive in my own head? And then the fourth thing that God was showing me through this time about the Word is, how do we obey it? And how do we obey Jesus? John 14:21 says, "Whoever has my commands and obeys them, he is the one who loves me. And he who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I too will love him and show myself to him." So if I want to love Jesus or really display my love for Jesus, one, I need to know what he says, and then two, I need to obey what he says. So those were four big things that God started to show to me through the Word and through just getting time in His Word. I would have never known those things were in there if those men hadn't held me accountable to getting into the Word on a regular basis. And so that happened. This is happening from the time frame of early 2014 to late 2016. Late 2016, I went to Kuwait for 9 months, and I probably had a little bit of a cocky mindset of, hey, there's no NAVS people in Kuwait at Camp Buehring. I'm going to go up there. I'm going to get something started. And thinking about it now, there was some of y'all may have seen the picture before, or other people posted that somebody from Lewis had been there before and painted on a big T-wall like Fort Lewis NAVS there. And so I don't know where that ties in, but I was not the first hard charger there. And I think I went there more with a mindset of what am I going to do here at Camp Buehring instead of what is God going to do here and how can I join in on what He's already doing. But thankfully, while I was there, I prayed that God would provide a man for me that I could pour into. And this was my first time ever being removed from that community that I grew up in, the spiritual community that I grew up in. And so God provided a man, Nathan McPherson. He was actually one of my roommates for the entire 9 months that we were there. And he said pretty upfront, one of the first months that we were there, that he was new in his relationship with Jesus and wanted to learn more about how he could obey Jesus. So again, I didn't know a whole lot, but I knew that getting in the Word was a good start. And so we got in the Word. He and I did daily. We even started a little small group for our clinic there at Camp Buehring. And that's about as far as we got through the time there, which it was amazing. But coming back from Kuwait and getting back to Lewis, I realized how much I didn't know, how much I didn't understand about helping other men follow Jesus, how little experience I had in that, and how cocky I probably really was, and how much knowledge I didn't have that I thought I had. And I also realized the importance of a spiritual community, the importance of sharing life with other like-minded people who are on mission for Jesus. That those men were also meeting with the men that were my key guys. So they were probably teaching those guys a lot more than just I knew. And so meditating on that and thinking on that, it really reminded me that, like, one, you weren't doing all these things on your own before you left, and two, it really takes a community to love on people and help all of us grow in Christ, because that's how it happened in my life if I really thought about it. It wasn't just one man. Jesus used multiple people. And so that went on and thought about that, about things that I had learned from Kuwait, and then a lordship decision came up into my life. And one of the best lordship decisions, a lordship decision is any decision that we make based on the kingdom. So anything can be a lordship decision. One of the biggest lordship decisions that I've seen a guy make was a guy named Brian Kunyahira. He was currently living with the Chongs and was living there specifically for discipleship and was offered command of one of the companies in 1st Special Forces Group out in Washington. And he turned down command so that he could spend time with Mike and Liz for the time that he was able to live there in that house. And I'm not an officer, and I don't know a ton about the officer side of the house, but I can understand the value of what that would look like, turning down command, turning down an opportunity for command. And a lot of people don't get that opportunity again. But Jesus honored Brian through his decision to grow in his relationship with Christ, and that opportunity came for him to take command later on down the road when he was not currently living with the Chongs and he was at a more stable place in his walk with Christ. Or I wouldn't say more stable, but in a more developed place. So it did not happen with me the first go-around when a lordship decision came about. I was not as obedient and probably didn't go to Christ as much as Brian did. I had the opportunity to re-enlist to come to North Carolina because that's where I'm from and that's where I wanted to come back to and go to airborne school en route. when I was promoted, those orders got cut or got deleted because I'd re-enlisted for a different slot that I was going for. And so the job that I was working in, my boss said that he could still get me to airborne school and I could go to Italy, or I could stay on the projected orders that I was at, which was Fort Riley, Kansas. And a lot of people, that's a no-brainer, go to Italy. But I feel like God was trying to teach me something about making lordship decisions and why did Bragg get taken away the first time. The first time Bragg came around, I was saying, I'm going to get to go to a cool school, I'm going to get to go back close to home, and then I rationalized it with, I can learn the same thing from the Bragg community that I can learn what I'm learning up here at Fort Lewis, which was true. I could get the same experiences, but the heart of my heart where it was at, why was I making that decision, was not where God wanted it to be. And so when this time came around about going to Italy or going to Kansas, I got to praying about it and thinking about it, and I didn't know anybody in Italy. I didn't know any people that were willing to spiritually mentor me and disciple me while I was in Italy. At Fort Riley, however, there was a great man, or a good man, James Carter, that was there, who was willing to move me into his house and to continue discipling me during my time there. And so I prayed about it, and God spoke pretty clearly to me in my quiet time, because I was asking him specifically to show me out of the Word. In Haggai chapter 1, verses 4 and 5, it says, "Why are you living in these luxurious houses while my house lies in ruins? This is what the Lord of the heaven army says. Look at what's happening to you." And so I felt that was God pretty clearly saying to me, are you going to take this time to live in your luxurious house and build up your career and your own ego and whatever else? Or are you going to take this time to build up my house in your heart and make a decision that's going to better your relationship with me? And so thankfully, God taught me the lesson on the second time about I chose Riley. He ended up having completely different plans, and those orders got deleted also, and I wound up in Korea for a year. So the Korea, and I say that because I think I would not have been in Korea if it wasn't for God. He wanted me there for a reason. Two reasons. One of them sitting here tonight. But I ended up going to Korea, and God blessed me with two men, Josh and another guy named Caleb, that I was able to spend time with them. And they taught me just as much as I taught them, and we all learned from each other there. And it was a great time being removed from community again. Not being removed from community was good, but it was good to see where God had improved in my life since the last time being removed. And Josh and Caleb and I were able to have a little small group again in our company, and we were able to plant our flag pretty early and let the rest of our unit know where we stood, and that opened the doors to a lot of opportunities to share with them. But another thing that God did while I was there was humbled the crap out of me again, because I probably went in, I went in with what am I going to do at Camp Casey, and not really asking the question, what does God want me to do while I'm here? And really not prepping the ground with prayer, asking Him to do things there instead of me thinking that I could just muscle it out. And so that led me to coming here to Bragg. So I did get here, I just didn't go east from Washington, I went west. That brought me here to Bragg, and I'm currently living in the pad with Dave and our other roommate Andrew, who's not here, but just really enjoying the time here, sharing life in community and learning from guys like John and guys like Matthew. And so through that whole time of whether being in Washington or Korea or here at Bragg, those two principles have stayed the same, of the importance of getting time in the Word and the importance of community, whether taking advantage of it while you're in community or trying to make community whenever you're removed from it, or reflecting on how much the community has taught you when you were in it. So I say all this to say that I have not made it yet. Just like Paul says, he was much further, but I am nowhere near close to at the end of the journey. Hopefully I'm towards the beginning of it, of still running with Christ and getting in the Word and sharing life in these communities. But I want to challenge you tonight with 3 things before I end this. How important is getting in the Word to you? And are you doing it on a regular basis, a daily basis? How important is sharing the Word with other people and helping them get in the Word for themselves? How important is sharing the Word with other people and helping them get into the Word for themselves? And then third, how important is sharing life with other believers to you? How important is learning how to love others and serve others to you? For me, all 3 of those things were probably very low on my care scale in the beginning stages of my relationship with Jesus. But I think Jesus has been working in my life over the past few years to bring those up, to making those the lens that I see everything through, making those lordship decisions on how does this affect Jesus and how does this affect His kingdom. So that's all I have. If you have any questions or need any verses repeated or anything else, please see me afterwards. Thank you very much.